Okay, so I think we can kind of go ahead and get started. So to introduce myself, I'm going to be the moderator for today. So my name is Karena Klimzak, but I also go by Corey. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Utah State University with Dr. Mike Lovin as my advisor, and I research how do we deliver ACT through technology. So kind of looking at adherence problems. How do we kind of translate these interventions from something that's typically delivered one-on-one to something a little bit different, and acceptability of these programs and things like that. And this panel idea kind of came up almost out of self-interest in some ways, because I was just kind of thinking like, okay, well, with the career path I'm going towards right now, like a traditional academic path, is that what I want to do? And as I kind of got more involved with this SIG, the acting with technology SIG, kind of learning more about industry as an alternative option, but there's not a lot of information out there about it. And so I was interested if maybe other students or other professionals are in a similar boat as me who have an interest in industry, or at least even some professional interest in industry in terms of how it can kind of help disseminate these programs. And then maybe a panel would help get us some answers and be a nice resource. So I'll go ahead and kind of introduce our panelists. And so we have Dr. Erica Torres. She is a bilingual licensed psychologist specializing in behavioral medicine, serving adults, children, youth, and families. She is passionate about applying behavior science and evidence-based interventions to design engaging and meaningful programs and digital products. And she sees the world through a DEIB lens and leads with empathy and humor to get things done in a variety of contexts. She's a wonderful human being. I love Erica. And then Rachel is a highly experienced behavioral scientist and internationally recognized subject matter expert in coaching. She is the scientific lead for technology forward service evolutions within Headspace, and she has deep expertise in technology delivered health coaching interventions and workplace related behavior change. I met Rachel this past summer at the ACBS conference, and we had some really nice chats. So I'm excited to see what she's going to bring to the table today. And Sarah Verducci is a multi-state licensed therapist working in product management and digital mental health. She is passionate about delivering compassionate, scalable, outcomes-based, innovative health products. She brings a values-first approach to her work in organizations, from hiring to strategy and everything in between. And Sarah is also the co-leader for the SIG as well, alongside me. Shane O'Neilhart is a licensed clinical social worker and is the senior clinical manager of the mental health coaching program at Lyra Health, and an expert in acceptance and commitment therapy. He serves as the vice president of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of ACBS and provides psychotherapy, supervision, and training in ACT. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of take away this image I had up, and I'm here to ask y'all some questions. So I'm kind of interested in how each of you got to where you are now. Could you speak a little bit about your career path story and what led you to an industry job in tech? And this is a question for everybody, but whoever wants to go first can go first.
I guess I'm not muted, so I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Rachel. It was something that didn't really make sense as I was moving through it, through my 20s and then going back to grad school, and like I worked in web development and web design, and then went and became a therapist, and those things felt very disparate. And then things have kind of coalesced for me, starting out as working as a therapist in digital interventions, and now in product management. And so they feel cohesive now, even though as I was moving through it, they did not.
Sorry. I don't know really where to start. Okay, so Corey, if the question is, how did I get into working with Headspace? I would say it was a complete accident. And I know I'm not the only person who's had that experience of like coming into this industry almost by chance, because I think it's such a new industry as well, and particularly in the UK, I would say that for behavioral scientists working in technology, I think the industry is a lot smaller. I got involved in Headspace. I was working as an academic at the Institute of Management Studies in Goldsmiths with people like Frank Bond and Joe Lloyd, and, you know, being part of a very workforce orientated CBS and ACT intervention kind of research group, if you like. And I got approached by Headspace because of my expertise in ACT-based coaching, and they wanted a health coaching intervention to help people who've got migraine. So it was more on that. I started out just consulting with them, and then I was like, this is really fun. I would love to do more of this. And I ended up coming out of academia and into industry. Now, I did also have a background at about 10 years in business consulting before I retrained as a psychologist. So for me, it's kind of nice to come back into industry and using my academic skills, my research skills, and my commercial skills all in one place. Like, for me, it's a very vibrant and interesting place to be, but total accident, total fluke. So not very helpful.
I can add to the group of people saying it happened by accident. So I had a background working in hospitals and inpatient psychiatry, partial hospitalization, and doing psychotherapy, and I never imagined that there was the job that I have now, I didn't even really know it existed or could exist for somebody who has the kind of background or degree that I have. But I did get really deep into ACT training and consultation, and I was starting to lead ACT trainings at UCSF in San Francisco, where I worked, and really enjoyed that, and was getting some, a little bit of traction doing that and doing it kind of outside of my work. And then the way that I found my particular job was actually Matt Boone, who's part of our community, who's a peer-reviewed ACT trainer, had posted on the listserv about it. So that's actually how that was the direct connection. And it was just, like this role that described all these things that I really wanted to do, which was like, dissemination of evidence-based practice and a lot of training and designing a training for a large group of providers. Yeah, I guess I hope the takeaway, it's not really like here's how you do it, but is that there are a lot of jobs that you don't know exist out there. And if you do enough searching, you might find yourself connected to one.
I love the stories. I think I also kind of fell into it, but it's been a bit of a long-winded road for me. I started doing some consulting in tech companies, and then I actually was recruited to be a product manager. And I realized that the kind of work that I enjoyed doing as a clinician, as a licensed psychologist, was not exactly in the space of product as it existed then, like 6 years ago. I think now it's a little bit more in alignment. And my passion for ACT was something that really helped me be successful as a consultant, because I would bring like the Hexaflex. How do I operationalize a Hexaflex to solve for this problem, for this end user journey, or for this specific business case? And that was really interesting and exciting. And then really tapping into like behavior design, like how do we engage folks with the app? How do we, use push notifications or reminders or things like that to actually create habit change, and hopefully for the better, right? Like for pro health behaviors, right? And so I love that. I was doing that part-time as a freelancer and was working behavioral medicine while doing that full time. And I just wanted to make a career shift. And so I think there's like elements of like putting my mind to that, to kind of call that into the universe, to say like, I want to be in this space in a different way, and just really became open to different opportunities. And the current work that I do is really at the intersection of product and program development and design for a great company called Able2, where our primary focus is mental health tech. So finally, after many iterations, really, I've been able to kind of arrive at a place where I feel really at home. So I think the key here is like being open to opportunities, just kind of having a focus on what you want to be working towards, and just the iterative process, you know, figuring things out as you go is okay.
Nice. Yeah, I like hearing everybody's story too. And what I'm hearing a lot of is just people finding joy in being able to kind of connect the disparity between like the research and the intervention in a way that maybe has like widespread impact in a different way that one-on-one therapy is of course helpful, but functions just a little bit differently in how it impacts kind of at a broader scale. And just people finding joy also in just the synergy of how like their different talents come together in a different kind of role that maybe other roles don't offer in the same way. So I'm interested in all of kind of the roles you have and what your everyday work looks like. So how does kind of your everyday work day kind of look? Maybe it's different from day to day, but if you were to kind of sum it up for someone who has zero idea and just wants kind of a window into your professional life, and how does ACT inform that work?
I'll go first on this one. Okay. So I work in the UK. I live in the UK, and I work East Coast time. So this gives me an opportunity that a lot of my colleagues who are all West Coast, like they come in and it's just like meeting. I actually get a good few hours of my day where everybody I work with is asleep, and it's brilliant. And I don't know how anyone can function without a couple of hours of just quiet kind of reflection time. So my day starts very quietly and quite reflectively. After that, I have a smattering of meetings, various different things. I have Slack pinging at me almost constantly, which I love it. I think Slack's a brilliant tool for staying in touch. And I generally will work predominantly on cross-functional squads. So for those of you who are not familiar, that's usually a combination of science reps, who would be myself. I'm in the science team, design, product, and engineering. There may be other folks in there, for example, for marketing or various other stakeholders. And I do a mix of driving different projects where really I'm leading on it. So I'm driving on some work around using wearables, being able to kind of set things up within Headspace so that we can work quite dynamically with our content recommendations. And then I also support some of the work. So I would be a subject matter expert within things like, for example, we're just setting up a new goal setting feature. So I've been supporting the team with that. So one of the things that I really like about the way that I work now is there's a lot of variety. And I also have a lot of autonomy. And I think that's because I get to, well, firstly, I think Headspace has got a little bit of a value around playfulness, and that suits me very well. It's very values aligned for me as a practitioner. They are just starting to move away from the very, very core content production, which has been meditation based, and we're actually starting to move much more into CBT focused modalities. So we've got an ACT program, which just been getting some emails about. So it's really exciting. That should be in the product in the new year. But I think more than that, I'm really trying to work within a process-based paradigm. So thinking about how we can create experiences right throughout our product that help people to obviously be more mindful. Headspace is excellent at that, but also to be more psychologically flexible. I'm not the only ACT practitioner, but I am the only person who's got that deep expertise in ACT. So a lot of my other colleagues have got like other modalities that they would use, and they've dabbled with ACT in the past. And so I think that's an opportunity and a challenge. So I will be very biased towards ACT and process-based kind of approaches. But I do also have to be very persuasive to my colleagues that that is the right way forward. And luckily, ACT is very evidence-based, and process-based approaches are becoming much more kind of mainstream. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I can go next. So just a little bit of background. Lyra Health is a mental health benefits company. So employers use Lyra to provide like a mental health benefit for all the people that work at their company, like companies like Starbucks, for example, have it. And we have a kind of a wide range of different things that we provide, but one of them is the mental health coaching program, which is the program that I am the clinical lead for. And that's people who have coach training. So like people who got coach certificates, who we train in an ACT-based model to work with clients who have mild and moderate mental health challenges. So not kind of in the domain of diagnosable conditions that a therapist is more qualified to work with, but people kind of on the lower end of the spectrum. In particular, like we use the PHQ-9 GAD-7 to as one of our main screening criteria. So kind of in the mild and the lower end of that moderate range. So ACT coaches are ACT is probably of all the evidence-based therapies the one that's most compatible with coaching, in my opinion. I think philosophically it's really well aligned. So a lot of what I'm doing is like translating things from CBT and other behavioral-based models into kind of ACT language and developing training. We have about 400 mental health coaches, so leading and developing trainings for the coaches, giving them kind of the basics of like behavioral ideas in a way that's also compatible with the way the coaches think. They don't want to be given trainings that are just like therapist trainings. They want it to be really specific to coaching. So a lot of what I'm doing is like translating. So a lot of it's like creating trainings and delivering trainings, but then things working with our product team. We're developing a parenting program, which is what I was doing earlier today. So that's another thing where we brought in a consultant who has a background in behavioral parent training, and then I'm helping to translate it to this kind of more like ACT model. You know, it's kind of really hard. It's a hard question to answer. There's so many different things on a day-to-day basis to do, but I'm focusing a lot on the ones that are like interacting with and training the coaches that we work with. But a lot of it is also like, you know, clinical consultation. I lead a team that does clinical consultation for our coaches, given that they don't have training in clinical assessment. They always have access to a clinician that they can consult with when they've encountered something that may or may not be appropriate for coaching. So like setting policies around those things, working with our product team. The last thing I'll mention is like working with the team, the machine learning team that uses we have a triage that clients go through when they join Lyra that kind of places them in the recommended type of care. And so working with that team to look at like, how is our model performing? Like what percentage of clients who actually get recommended coaching get escalated out of coaching because it was deemed that they weren't a good fit? How do we do a better job of screening for those things in advance so that we're not having to put people through a transition of care, for example? I'll stop there because I could keep going for a long time.
Should I go, Sarah? So my work at Able2 is not specific to ACT, but I think there's elements of ACT around like psychological flexibility, mindfulness that I'm hoping to bring into like process. So I also, like Rachel, work in pods with like engineers and designers and product managers and sometimes marketing folks and sales folks and other colleagues, and we have like very specific roadmaps around delivering certain products and programs, and we are evidence-based CBT kind of protocolized product and program. But I think there's through innovation, there's like opportunities to start to bring in different elements of ACT into the work that we're doing. And one of the things that I inherited that I'm really excited to see how do we deliver this material is it's a transdiagnostic kind of protocol. And so there's elements of ACT, though terms are a little different and the framework's a little different, but there's like the essence of some of the core things that we believe in ACT, like psychological flexibility, which the UP calls cognitive flexibility, and it's a little different, but you know, mindfulness-based kinds of interventions that I'm hoping to adapt and operationalize in the work that we're doing, as we still stay true to the CBT model that, you know, is foundational to the work that we're doing. So I think with that said, there's ways in which one can remain flexible and even just bring the essence of what it means to like be an ACT practitioner or be ACT informed into the work without actually implementing ACT interventions, if that makes sense. And I think all of that counts and it matters, and it can really make a difference, right? Because some folks are not ready to fully roll out, you know, an ACT protocol, but elements of it can be welcomed and can be a good stepping stone towards greater flexibility, if you will, in how we think about these things.
You want to go ahead, Sarah?
Yeah, I was just making sure that Erica wasn't just taking a break for water. So let's see, like Shane, it's like so many different, I do so many different things. I have to like think about like, how do I even summarize what I do? So the company that I work with is called Meru Health, and we have a 12-week treatment program that's licensed therapist supported. And while it's not like prescriptively ACT, it's like a psychological flexibility goal with some values, a lot of mindfulness, you know, these common themes, right? And like Rachel, so I live on the West Coast, but I work East Coast hours because a lot of our team is in Finland. And so I have this kind of like nice crossover time zone. And then I have the rest of the afternoon. So after this, I have the rest of my afternoon to work on things that I like on my own and have kind of like non-meeting time, which is, I love it. I love the time piece. Day to day, things are moving really quick. You know, we're officially in a startup space. And so there's ambiguity everywhere, and ACT comes in very helpful for that, right? And so you're always just like guiding your ship with your values, and one day it's very different from the next. Every day I'm like syncing with kind of some primary stakeholders. I work really closely with the clinical team, and then I'm kind of like this bridge between clinical and product. And so I also work most days with people from design, and I'm communicating with developers or engineers. And I spend right now a lot of my time in user research and also in research and development, so like running pilots and things like that. I'm a subject matter expert as a clinician on the product team. And then I also kind of own like therapist scalability. And so I'm deeply involved in therapist workflows and things related to that nature, which are lots of things. And gosh, I mean, to geek out for just a tiny second based on some things that some other people said, I feel like when you zoom out, you know, and think about CBS, it's like there's always overlap in these other theories, whether you're talking about Buddhism or you're talking about, you know, other philosophies, right? There's these like core things that you find in different spaces. Something that's really like exciting for me as a product manager is that product thinking has so much overlap with ACT when you zoom out, you know, where you're constantly iterating, you're using curiosity, you're trying to help understand the why, about like, why are your customers using your product? And I love that stuff. So ACT and product thinking also just like naturally jive for me, and that gets me going. So
nice. It sounds like y'all are working on some really exciting and fun projects. I wanted to ask kind of a follow-up question, specifically about something you said, Shane. You said that you feel like ACT is like and coaching are like the perfect kind of fit for one another. And I've been seeing increases in publications on coaching. My thesis was on coaching. And because this is an ACT-centered talk, I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more on that, and maybe Rachel can jump in too, because I know she does a lot with coaching as well.
Yeah, sure. And first, I think the thing I define is just people use the word coach a lot of different ways. So the kind of coaches that I'm talking about are ones who went to like ICF accredited coaching programs. So this is typically what you think of like life coaching, business coaching, but there's many different flavors of coaching, and not everybody means the same thing by it. But those kinds of programs teach that coaching is about like a collaborative relationship with your client, where the coach is not presenting themselves as an expert with the answers to the client's problems, but presents themselves as like a collaborator to help them find solutions and insights from within. And there's this saying that clients are not broken, they're whole, resourceful, and capable, or creative, I think is the word. And then this idea of like not putting yourself on a one-up position with your client. Coaching tends to be very person-centered, very much about exploring their experiences, and coaches are almost discouraged, I think, from a lot of problem solving. So they tend to be really asking a lot about emotions and values. So I see a lot of connection between ACT and those philosophies. I also think the fact that ACT is like the least pathologizing of, it doesn't come from the medical model, and coaches are not trained, if they're not clinicians, not trained to think in a diagnostic framework or in a deficit framework in the same way. So those are all the reasons that I think ACT is really compatible with coaching. Curious to hear what Rachel thinks.
So full disclosure, my PhD is in ACT coaching. So I designed an ACT-based coaching program, which we then piloted and then tested in the workplace. So I think one of the, just to build, I was kind of, Shani, as you were talking, I was like, oh, what can I add to this? What's going to be helpful to kind of put a spotlight on that you hadn't already said? And for me, I think it's the applicability of ACT. It's not even for me as a therapy. So I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. I made a decision when I became a psychologist that wasn't the kind of psychology that I wanted to go into for various different reasons. Main one, having worked in EAPs for a long time and seeing the level of burnout and thinking about what would suit me very well. What suits me very well is actually working on people kind of being the best that they can be, which is not to say that therapists don't do that. But really what I was interested in was helping people to perform at their best. And so I ended up going into workplace performance kind of related psychology. And that was really the way that we were applying it. If you're familiar with some of the work that's coming out of the IMS at Goldsmiths, the work of Frank Bond, the work of Joe Lloyd, we're looking at things like, how do we improve people's performance as well as their well-being? It's a kind of almost like I sometimes say it's kind of the holy grail, really, of workplace psychology, is how do we help people to have really meaningful and enhancing workplace experiences, and be the best that they can be. So that was really where I was coming from. And I agree with you, Shane, absolutely. And I think ACT is an excellent paradigm for coaching. There's a lot of crossover as well. I got asked to write a book chapter about this for a positive psychology book, talking about the kind of crossover and the synergy between positive psychology and ACT-based coaching. And it's a really interesting that, they come from very different places, but I think there is a lot of connections between them. So, again, it's this, you're not coming from a model of deficit, you're coming from a space where really what we're doing is we're looking at how can you help people to be the best that they can be. And I was thinking about this the other day. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody on the call, but I'm pretty confident that ACT is probably the only psychological kind of behavior change that can offer something at the full spectrum from, I am very, very clinically unwell to I am at the top of my game, world-class athlete. It has something that speaks to pretty much every human because of that ability to, it doesn't come from the weird place, weird being, Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratized nations. The World Health Organization program that's adapted ACT to populations throughout the world, for example, like displaced people who are refugees. Like for me, the way that I think about psychology and humans and the work that I do, Headspace has got this very kind of challenging and aspirational mission, which is to help the health and happiness of the world. And to do that, I think you have to use something that's very flexible and that can appeal to pretty much everybody. So sorry, I went at a slight tangent away from coaching there into helping the entire world. But I feel like everybody on the panel can get on board with that from what you said already. So hopefully not too far away from the target question, Corey.
No, of course. I loved all of that. And I think it really highlights coaching specifically kind of highlights that piece of tech that we can all appreciate in terms of like scalability and reaching a broad audience, because maybe there aren't enough therapists out there for everyone to have a therapist, but coaching requires less schooling, less training. You can do it in briefer sessions, and it brings in that human element. So kind of the best of both worlds, what you get from tech and what you get from having a therapist.
And just so hard to jump in, Corey, I'll just say one thing. I actually have come to believe that coaching is better for a large group of people who don't need to see a therapist. So it's not just like that they can't see a therapist, actually they're better off. If you don't need to be diagnosed with a mental health condition, then I don't think you need to see a therapist.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in the spirit of like, you know, that existential nature of ACT and why it works across different spectrum of need and like just like the humanism behind it. I think that not everyone needs a therapist, but everyone could benefit from a coach or from a peer or from someone to kind of help scaffold whatever life is throwing at you. And so I think, and that also doesn't quite jive as well with like the medical model, or like it does not quite align as well with the deficit models that we're a part of or systems. But I think there's a real shift. And I think that's where like ACBS and just ACT more broadly can really bring a different element of like humanity and just like strength-based, you know, kind of growth mindset, as opposed to like a deficit, you know, diagnostic manual, you know, labeling kind of perspective that I think we've been kind of trapped in various ways.
Yeah. Well, I think we've talked a lot about like what we enjoy about y'all's jobs, and like what are some of the benefits and like what it brings to not only the field, but just brings to the nation and international well-being. But I'm kind of curious on the flip side of that, like what are some of the challenges you kind of bump across or friction points you see working in this kind of role?
I think it's really
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
okay. I think that you get really good really fast at translating ethics, clinician needs, the clinical experience, edges of like mental health experience. Like you have to educate everyone in every corner of the company on because they may not have that education. They may have never been in therapy. And so you get really good at that really fast, I think, if you're going to do a good job operating in that space.
I love the positive spin on that, because I think you're right. Yeah, like one becomes very good at like what I've been calling myself like a cultural liaison, or like a cultural broker. Because I think it's true that there is like some language and just nuance and how we communicate cross-functionally within our pods and across disciplines. But I think the reality of it is, yes, one can exercise and get really good at it, and it is hard and it is challenging, and definitely a great opportunity to exercise ACT principles and how we actually relate to each other, and how do we you know, hopefully assume positive intent and things of that nature, like, and maybe, you know, aim at over communicating or just over clarifying, to make sure that we're all understanding the same thing. Because I've been in conversations where I think we're all having the same conversation, but it turns out we're not. Or the opposite, like I'm totally confused. I'm like, are we even talking about the same thing? And it turns out we are talking about the same thing, but each respective discipline refers to the thing in a different way. And so then we have to like pause and be like, okay, just to be sure, we're calling it this way in this team, but this team calls it this other thing, and we're all talking about this other, you know, just to be sure I'm describing the thing here. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And then just, you know, priorities, right? Like you may be working on something for a long time, you think it's a go, and then it's a no-go. And you're like, oh, so you have to pivot. You have to be really flexible. Again, really relevant here, like really psychologically flexible and just behaviorally flexible to be able to just like kind of pivot and iterate on your own kind of way of thinking about things, because the roadmap is not going to be fixed, and it shouldn't be, because actually that's how you create the best kind of programs and products, when you can actually think through what's relevant and needed now versus being stuck on like what was said 3 months ago, which may be totally irrelevant right now. So it's a lot of flexibility, I would say, all around.
I'm just going to jump in just to +1 on an awful lot of that. We have the same kind of challenge that, especially when you're exploring a new area and you're building a new feature or you're doing something new, you get this challenge of you have to develop to share language around that with people who come from, you know, different disciplines. It's kind of part of the fun, but it is a nightmare until you get there, because, you know, you're talking about something over here and they're calling it something else. So I think that's been quite a big challenge for us as well. I was thinking about some of the things that I kind of see as more challenging in my work. So my background is much more as a like one-to-one, face-to-face practitioner, and moving into a software, essentially like a software delivered intervention. It's actually keeping that adherence, I think, is one of the, you know, making something that is engaging and kind of sticky and becomes a habit for people. I do a lot of reading around that to sort of, you know, what are the kind of the ways that we can do that, the way that we can help people to develop that habit, which of course is a whole other area of psychology that you're kind of leaning into to try and develop that. And I also think there's something for me around what I think of in my mind as being ethical scalability. So if we have now within Headspace, we've merged with Ginger, and we have human care providers. And so, you know, we're looking at how can we use the software to help people to, you know, be more effective. What does that mean? That means more clients, essentially. And a scalable product means that we have to be able to, you know, make a certain amount of profit. We have to be, you know, thinking about it that way. However, with a background in occupational psychology, you know, I'm thinking about how do we do that in a way that doesn't create burnout within our practitioners, our care providers, you know. So you've got these kinds of constant challenges of the pressures of the commercial operation for the organization to survive and be successful, but then also the ethical considerations of your care practitioners, every single human being that works in the company, and all of your members. Now, I love that, because I think we really talk about that very openly at Headspace. You know, it's something that we do talk about and that is genuinely important to the organization. And then the final piece that I think is a real friction, it's like a real opportunity, but it's also a friction point, is adaptability. So as a human, you know, care practitioner, when I'm talking with clients and I'm working with clients, I can adapt myself completely to them. But when you're doing interventions within the software, it's how do you do that? So I'm reading up a lot at the minute around just-in-time interventions, AI delivered kind of adaptive models and that sort of thing. Great fun, you know, nice problems to be able to try and solve, but problems and challenges nevertheless.
I'll just focus on two quick ones. The first challenge, I think, is the scalability that Rachel mentioned, which is we have built this program, this mental health coaching program. We've shown that it's effective. We've published some research. Particularly, our most recent paper was with clients with moderate anxiety and depression symptoms who, you know, like almost 90% of those clients show clinical improvement, which is really, really great. And so we want to offer this to more people, and we want to scale up the program, but there's these kinds of unexpected, both the kinds of things that Rachel mentioned, like you want to make sure that you're taking care of the coaches and not promoting burnout and not just scaling things so quickly that that you lose quality or that people just get burned out in the process. But there's also just like things like, you know, because coaches can work with clients in all 50 states and because they're not mandated reporters, I lead a clinical team that deals with this like onslaught of cases where we have to like look at, do we have to make a report, and do we have to make a report? And now we're seeing clients actually in other countries, and so that adds another level of like, what are the mandated reporting laws in Australia, you know, and like these are problems that are, you know, on an individual level are kind of not fun, but, you know, manageable, but at scale can become really, really challenging. And really now I've realized require a lot of forward thinking and a lot of planning for like, how are we going to manage the influx of these kinds of things? The other one, which is kind of unique to, it almost sounds like a humble brag or something, but I work in an environment with all these coaches, which is just like the coolest kind of people to have as colleagues. Like people are always leading you through mindfulness exercises. People are always having these like, you know, like heart-to-heart conversations and being super honest. And all those things that are like going to an ACT training are like side by side with like work. And now I have like realized that like my brain associates like mindfulness exercise with Slack messages and like whenever I go to like just practice mindfulness myself, it has become very, very hard for me to slow down because of the context in which all of those things that used to be so special and so like so isolated have now just become side by side. Like I go from something like that, leading a training, it's super experiential, super intimate, to like being in a meeting where I'm like deep in spreadsheets, and that context switching has really kind of messed with my brain in a weird way.
Yeah, I'm hearing
Yeah,
a lot of like, oh, go ahead, great, Sarah, sorry.
I know I talked already. Can I just chime in about that? I could totally concur. And then also like the context switching for me also is impacted by what team I'm talking to. So I can be talking kind of like what Eric was saying about one thing, but when I'm talking to the developers, I'm talking about it within this context. And then I go and I talk to therapists and I use an entire different language to try to talk to them. And then sometimes that can get confusing when those meetings are like back to back. It's like, oh wait, we're using this terminology, and like a little bit of like whiplash with all the context switching.
And you might be the same as me, Sarah, where that's actually compressed and you are going back to back because the overlap isn't huge. So yes, I have that too. The context switching, I can get really, really, really tired. But luckily, I finish work usually in about 15 minutes and go straight to bed, which people are horrified by. But, you know, I'm normally so tired that I'm not good for anything else. So.
I'm hearing a lot of like the benefits to the position are also a double-edged sword, in that the scalability has all these ethical considerations, and you know, you get to use many different skill sets and they all kind of jive together, but then also it gets overwhelming having to like dabble in all these different things. And then also working on an interdisciplinary team sounds great because you get other people's expertise from different pockets. You're not in your own little echo chamber or bubble, but then you have to kind of come up with your own language on how do you communicate what you're thinking in kind of a psychologist's term or a therapist's term into their language. So this is going to be our last question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, given the time. But I know in our audience right now, we have a mix of people. I see people, nicknames, who I know are people who are in academia, and I'm sure there are people who are not from academia as well. And I've seen kind of almost this tension kind of between academic spaces and industry spaces in terms of criticisms from academia, like, oh, maybe interventions are going too fast, not enough evidence-based kind of check-ins on is what they're doing actually working. And then on the flip side, maybe industry spaces criticizing academic spaces for moving too slowly, right? Do you guys have ideas on how we can better kind of bridge the two and have them work maybe a bit more hand in hand? And they probably, I mean, of course they already do, right? ACT is an evidence-based treatment that was developed in an academic space and is now being used more widely. But how can we have a little bit more flow between the two?
I don't mind going first with this because it's something that we are doing quite a lot about at Headspace within my team, within the science team. So at the minute, we have a side of the science team which is focused on randomized control trials. You know, it's real world, it's very controlled environment using Headspace. We have a research version of the app where the content is locked, and that's what people tend to use if they partner with us on studies. And there's quite a lot of studies using Headspace. It's one of the things I like about the company is that they are quite evidence-based. And from Ginger, we've inherited colleagues who are really focused on generating real world data using healthcare claims and being able to show the impact of Ginger. And so I'm really excited about the fact that we're going to have those two sides of the house kind of come together. And another thing for like another benefit of working in technology is you can see the behavior that people have, you know, whereas if I'm coaching people, they go, they do their thing, they come back, we talk about it. But within the app, you can actually see what people have done or haven't done. And so there's a link between people's lives and the intervention that you've built that I think you don't get as a one-to-one kind of real world practitioner. So I think with the data that we can get, the short answer is I think we need both. And I also think that in the 20 or so years that I've been in industry, and part of that I was in academia, but I always kind of kept a link with doing consultancy pieces. I think organizations are becoming a lot more savvy about asking for data. They're much more likely to take a evidence-based approach to what they're buying from the HR perspective, human resources or talent or whatever it might be. So I think as an organization, we really benefit from having that evidence base. So I would never be kind of, and I do think it's difficult. I wouldn't say that everybody, you know, everybody's got to be the same, but I think for Headspace, it's actually become quite a USP for us, the evidence base, and it makes conversations with clients that we are either working with or pitching to, you know, they're much more straightforward because we've got the evidence to show, here's the RCT data, here's the impact on different outcomes, here's the real world claims-based data. So it's a nice story. I mean, I am very biased because I do believe in evidence-based practice in the workplace, but I think it makes a good story that you can tell as an organization. It's a worthwhile investment.
I have one particular idea that I'll throw out there, which is I think that given how how many companies there are doing the kinds of things that that Lyra is doing, but some of the other companies that are represented here too, trying to serve people through different ways, but through work employers and other ways of connecting clients, I think it's going to continue to grow. I think there's a lot of opportunity to help a lot of people. There's also business interests, people trying to make a lot of money off of this, right? And the same risks that exist in any kind of business where somebody figures out how to make a lot of money without by cutting corners or not delivering quality care. And I think there is not a lot of comprehension. At least I'll speak for what Lyra does. We go to employers, we try to convince the benefits leaders that we are delivering something that's really going to improve the health of their population. And then there's other companies that are making claims. We try to be, I'll speak from the people that I interact with, I think really responsible about the claims that we make, that they're backed by the data that we have. There's definitely some companies out there that are making claims that are not backed by data. And there's things that are just would never be accepted in the world of academia, like putting a press release and making claims about a study without linking to the study, like making these wild claims without even providing a citation for them. I see this kind of stuff. So I kind of, my suggestion is I think what we need is some way of evaluating the quality of research that these companies are producing, and some almost third party that could be in a position of saying that, because there's not a high level of literacy, I think, from the people who have the power to make decisions to give people access to this mental health care. There's a very low level of literacy when it comes to research. So I think it would be good for them to have some kind of, trusted resource for them to look and say, okay, this company does have the data to back up what they're doing, and this one doesn't, or standards or something like that. And I'm not sure that the industry itself I haven't seen that being produced by the industry itself.
this isn't specifically a solution, but I think it's important to, like, I think there's a lot of tension between academia and industry, and that maybe that tension serves a purpose, and between this tension we strike a good balance. But that really, I mean, if we can use CBS to help more people, and industry can be an avenue for that. And so if we're talking, I think a lot of us are essentially talking about digital health today. And digital health has a great opportunity to reach populations and masses of people that don't have access to care. And if we can use CBS in that space, like, everybody wins, like the world wins if we do a good job at it. And so ultimately, I think there's alignment there, but then there's tension in the how and the way in which we go about things that we need to continue to do better at. But the outcome is hopefully going to be good for all parties.
Yeah, and one last brief thing I'll say is that, yeah, I think the challenge with like not having specific regulation on the evidence of how effective or, you know, the impact of certain interventions is an interesting challenge. I also think there's different ways to do it. Yeah, like randomized controlled trials is one way. Adapting evidence-based protocols is a different way. Feedback to informed care is a different way of just kind of closing the loop on how are we managing like the quality of the material, the content and the process of what we're delivering, in lieu of the fact that we don't have a specific regulations. I know FDA has been dabbling with like certain devices being FDA approved and things like that, but in lieu of there being an actual device, how do you FDA approve like a treatment manual or something like that, right? Like, it's very complicated, but I think there's definitely opportunity for a little bit more oversight. If not, like entities that come and oversee the work, internal kind of consistency within our companies, at the kind of legal, ethical, compliance, clinical levels, to say we're putting our best foot forward, we're doing the best we can with whatever limitations we have, and document that accordingly so that we're being ethical in how we're communicating what we're doing.
Yeah, so basically we need more overhead, more like kind of checks and balances. And it kind of speaks to what Sarah said about maybe that tension does serve a purpose in serving as that checks and balances, keeping each other in line, providing some accountability. So I'll open it up to the audience now. I know I only have 3 minutes left, but hopefully I really enjoyed the discussion and I thought it was very fruitful. I'm curious if anyone else has questions. Maybe no questions from the audience, but I guess one question I kind of have.
I have a question for the
Oh,
audience.
yeah.
How many of our audience also work in this industry already? Everyone's probably like doing the washing up with the headphones on. That's the kind of thing I do.
We have one hand raise.
Two
hand raises.
I think Asha does as well.
3.
So we've got a few. Yeah. I'm also interested if folks are finding the same kinds of things, if this is chiming. I imagine just from the kind of how consistent we've been on the panel. We haven't practiced this. We don't have a script. You know, it does feel like there are some genuine shared experiences when you're working in this space as a psychologist or a behavioral scientist using acceptance and commitment therapy or CBS type approaches. So it's just been really helpful for me actually to hear everybody else's, and I'm feeling very normalized. Like I'm not the only one carrying this burden.
I wish we could hear from the audience. Oh, Erica, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I ditto that, and I was thinking it's almost like, you know, a support group, right? We were thinking about like where to take the SIG in what direction. And maybe part of it is just like gathering and sharing best practices, but also opportunities and challenges, and support each other. Yeah, safety in numbers. That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and sharing. I've appreciated it, and other people will too. We're gonna have the recording. If you guys are comfortable, I'll talk about it with you guys after. But we'll be sharing that with the SIG potentially. I do want to give a plug to our group. So let me see. We had this whole panel was kind of put together by the Acting and Technology SIG, which me and Sarah are the leaders for. And so if you enjoyed today, if you got something out of it, and you're not already a part of the SIG, I really invite you to join. So if you go to our website, you can see the little sign up button and kind of learn more about what kind of events we put together and what our goal is as a SIG. I also wanted to put a plug in for the therapist and tech group. I'm sure that I found it very helpful. And so if I did, I'm sure other people will too. A little bit of a larger group with more resources. And they put together some really amazing presentations, very informative, especially for someone not coming or not really clued into an industry space. But it's almost like a door into that, and kind of being able to pick up on lingo and terms that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So again, thanks, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. This was fun.